So much media, so little time. Who keeps track of it all? That would be me. This is Bob Andelman, and this is the Mr. Media Interview, sponsored by the audiobook edition of Will Eisner, A Spirited Life, now available on iTunes and Audible.com. And the show's recorded live on blogtalkradio.com from the new Media and American League Baseball capital of the world, St. Petersburg, Florida. As I'm saying this, I can't help wondering if, by the time you hear this, I won't be obsolete. You think I'm kidding? I'm not. In her new book, Obsolete, an encyclopedia of once common things passing us by, Anna Jane Grossman reels off a stunning list of devices, equipment, and habits that were once everywhere and now are nowhere. This list would include body hair, the evening news, long-distance charges, housewives, lickable stamps, short basketball shorts, and slide projectors. The disposable society now comes with an encyclopedia. At least it's an alphabetical look to the past, and its chief historian is Anna Jane Grossman. Anna Jane, welcome to Mr. Media.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hey, how you doing? So what on earth caused you to catalog this list of our past, distant, and recent, I don't know, mistakes, cast-offs? What would you call it?
Well, I think I've always felt a deep sense of nostalgia, kind of a nostalgia for things that have just happened, that, you know, are just down the road behind me. And I started to realize that a lot of people, my generation, I think have this similar sense of watching things become old before our eyes. You know, not so long ago you had one Walkman that you kept for, 5, 10, 15 years. Now we go through iPod, cell phone, everything at such a speed that we don't sort of have the same attachment to, especially to objects that we once did.
What does that say about us? Does it say that the people before us held on to things or valued things more often, or we just have greater variety or opportunity? What's going on?
Well, as far as technology goes, technology is improving, I guess you could say, at an exponential rate. Gordon Moore talked about, he was Intel's co-founder, and he talked about in 1965 how the number of transistors that could be put on a chip would double every 2 years. And that has happened, and that's why things have just gotten smaller and smaller, and how we can put more information in smaller objects. I think that we've started to put such a value on putting more in a small place, building things, growing things, that we've left a lot of smaller things in our wake, often problems that didn't really need to be solved. A lot of people I talk to are very nostalgic about mixtapes, and very few people use them today or use cassette players at all. But there wasn't necessarily that much wrong with them. It wasn't necessarily a problem that really needed to be addressed, and yet population's constantly growing. We're constantly learning more and more, and we're finding new solutions to things that that we didn't know needed solving.
It's like you're a mind reader, because the first thing you mentioned is mixtapes, and I had a note to myself to ask if you had sent an IM to Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist letting them know that mixtapes are obsolete.
I didn't. You know, what's interesting about mixtapes is that they're actually having a kind of revival, but it's like a revival of the idea of mixtapes as opposed to actual mixtapes. I haven't seen anyone making mixtapes recently, but they sell USB flash drives that are shaped like mixtapes now. I've seen them printed on T-shirts. I've seen handbags. I even saw a sculpture that was a melted mixtape shaped into a skull. I think it's a medium that people are thinking about a lot these days. There's even a couple, I believe, down in Texas that has been doing a lot of business restoring 8-tracks. so a lot of people hang on to these things, in a way that you won't hang on to digital photos, for example, or MP3s that you recently downloaded. Those aren't things that in the future or now are stored in boxes under the beds. Those aren't things that we look through that we're going to look through 30 years from now. I think the same way that we look at printed photos now, for example.
We've got a lot of people coming into the live web chat that accompanies the show. So I want to let everybody know, if you'd like to give a call, if you've got a comment or question for Anna Jane Grossman, the author of Obsolete, an encyclopedia of once common things passing us by. I just like saying it. I don't know. But, folks, you can give us a call at 1-646-595-3135. You don't have to be in the web chat to call us. It's just I can see the people in the web chat. Again, 1-646-595-3135. Now, Anna, you're out there on Twitter, and you've got websites, and you're on Huffington Post. Any of these things you think will be obsolete? I mean, I assume that there'll be a second edition one day of the book. Anything you're doing now that you think will be obsolete?
Well, I've written a lot for newspapers and magazines, and I certainly worry about them becoming obsolete. In the book, everything's written in the past tense, and actually, I think the publisher had a hard time. I had a hard time convincing them that it was okay to write about books in the past tense, just for the sake of consistency. But I think there's a fine line between things that go out of fashion, things that go out of style, and things that become obsolete. And that was really a tightrope that I tried to walk carefully as I was writing the book, because there's always new fashions. There are always new trends. There's always new shows, new celebrities. But that doesn't necessarily make what came before obsolete. I think the definition of obsolete for me is when something's replacing an idea or an object that no longer really serves the purpose. It no longer really has the utility that it did.
Where does body hair fit into that?
Body hair is one I actually, truth be told, I think could probably be argued that that's as much of a trend as it is something that's obsolete. But we're definitely less hairy people than we used to be. And you could also argue, though, that technology has a big part to do with that, as far as laser hair removals and all the energy that's gone into growing hair and removing hair. It's pretty amazing. You'd think we would have found a cure for cancer by now when you think of all the effort. So I think that body hair, one of the things I talk about in the book is all these spas and salons that are offering treatments for children. Parents are bringing their children in to get their legs lasered, for example. And once a kid gets their hair lasered, it doesn't really grow back in the same way that it does, when you shave it. So those children might never know what it's like to have hairy legs or what have you.
Well, I was going to say, and the what have you. I mean, there's a lot of people who believe that their private hair does not need to exist either, and I don't know.
Sure.
I don't know. There's a part of
it's a matter of opinion whether, I guess. Well, it's a matter of opinion whether it's going to be a loss. Well, is it a dumb society? No, I don't think we're a dumb society. I think we're a fortunate society that these are some of the things that we're concerned about in our lives. That we have we have the luxury to worry about our our body hair.
Well, okay, you can't argue with that. We do have that luxury. Did you find in doing the research and the selection for the book that there were things that you were doing or that you possessed that other people seem to agree was obsolete? And have you changed anything that you're doing as a result of the research on the book?
One thing that that I write about in the book is making plans and keeping in touch, not breaking dates. That's one thing that I think I definitely do, and I think a lot of people I know do. I think the idea of making a plan and sticking with it has become obsolete because we're all so reachable all the time now that we don't hesitate to change our plans at the last minute. Use our iPhone to email someone across the room or call. Whereas, not so long ago, if you were planning to meet someone at the movies and you decided before you left the house that you didn't actually want to go, you would have had a hard time getting in touch with them. So I've tried to be more sort of considerate about that because I don't think our feelings about being stood up, for example, have changed. I also definitely notice how our behavior on the phone has changed a lot. Everything from saying hello with a question mark when you answer the phone. It's amazing how it's such a small thing that we all just took for granted for so long. That's changing pretty quickly. Now when you answer the phone, you know who it is, so you don't have that same question mark, or you don't answer the phone at all. I have such memories as a kid coming home to the answering machine and just like feeling so excited about. I got my own answering machine. I don't know, maybe when I was like 13, and it was so exciting to come home and see the light going and wondering who called me and what they were going to say. And now I just look at like my voicemail indicator with such dread. So make of that what you will, but I think we're a society that's so connected that there's something in a lot of us that's kind of resisting it. Sending calls to voicemail, or not not using the phone very much at all.
Well, I imagine the problem with the voicemail that you're getting, that you're dreading answering, is because it's all those editors calling to say thanks a lot for making us obsolete ahead of our time. Thank you.
Oh. I'm sure that's not the case. What?
Has anyone taken issue with anything that's in, I know the book hasn't been out very long now, maybe a couple of weeks at this point, but has anyone taken issue with anything that you've said was obsolete? And do you have any second thoughts about anything?
A lot of people take issues with most of the things because with many of the things because they don't quite get that everything in this book still exists. I'd say that that's the biggest misunderstanding. These are all things that are kind of on the cusp of obsolescence. You can still buy whiteout. You can still write checks. People still use handkerchiefs. But these are things that are fading, that might not exist 10, 20, 30 years ago. My real goal is to sort of make a time capsule of right now, of the things that might be forgotten. Sort of making I tried to give people the opportunity to look at just the everyday things that we take for granted, like I was saying hello. Cursive writing is another one. Not learning how to do script school anymore. CDs, boom boxes. So but I would say that that's the biggest misunderstanding. But there are a lot of people who are great champions of of many obsolete objects. I still know plenty of people who use rotary phones just because they like them. They like the heft. People who I've met several people who have 3 or 4 Rolodexes on their desk at any one time. just because things are becoming obsolete doesn't mean, like I was saying, we're solving problems that didn't necessarily need to be solved. So in many cases, the original is pretty darn good. But in many cases, the original is harder and harder to get. Polaroid is an example that I write about in the book. They stopped making Polaroid film last year, and there's been a lot of discussion about that. A lot of people who've expressed a lot of sadness, and if you read some of the blogs, almost anger that they can't get this kind of film anymore.
Well, it used to be, you could make that joke about, hey, do you have any naked pictures of your wife? And say, do you want some? Because you had Polaroid pictures. But of course now it's, you can go to YouTube and you can see anybody's wife anyway.
I know, and that's progress, right?
Well, I've got the book in hand, and I'm the very first entry. This is interesting. The very first entry is adult bookstores. That's what made me think of the naked pictures of your wife story joke. And you say, this is great. A place outside of the home to privately indulge prurient interests that had nothing to do with reading. We've taken for granted so long that they were called adult bookstores, but
sure.
Not a lot of books.
Not a lot of books.
But the same page, after-school specials, airport goodbyes. We don't think about that, but airport goodbyes, they don't happen anymore unless you basically do it at the car because you can't wait with that person. They've got an hour through security, and that's completely.
Well, also
changed.
when you think about so many things about airports and travel in general, bellhops. Partially because we have so many so many of us have suitcases now that have wheels, which is such a small innovation that you'd think would have happened 70, 80, 90 years ago. Where I guess the invention of the wheel was happened way before that. But there aren't the same people at the airport who are there to help you carry your bags or at the hotels or that kind of thing. I also talk about hotel keys, which have largely been replaced by cards. And one of the people I talked to for the book was a locksmith, and a big part of his business had been going to hotels and motels, often week after week, switching out the locks, which is what they had to do in order to keep down theft. Especially at some of the better hotels. So often they had a locksmith on staff who was just constantly replacing locks. Now they could do it just by, a push of a button. They can change the code on the card.
Now, you have two entries that are interesting to me. They're letters apart, but they seem somewhat similar. You have anonymity and privacy. Doesn't seem like people care. Too many people don't seem to care about their own anonymity or privacy anymore. It's like I guess I disagree with myself. They don't care about their anonymity. They want us to know everything about them. The joke, of course, is what they had for lunch. By the way, I had a corned beef and pastrami sandwich. If anybody can't wait for the tweet later, and we get photos of them doing everything. And then on the other hand, people are all concerned about privacy, that, their information is all out there. I guess, we want to have it both ways.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. We do want to have it both ways. Especially if you look at reality TV, it's just amazing. I feel like we all must now know 4 people who've been on reality TV. I don't know how they keep finding people. But it's a slippery slope. If you don't use Twitter, you don't update your status on Facebook, you can start to feel behind. Just like you might feel behind if you're not text messaging or whatever, even if you're not necessarily interested in these things. But then you start to ask, well, what am I gonna tweet about? Am I gonna tweet about my lunch and who the hell cares? But I think kids growing up today have a very different idea about public and private information. If starting, maybe 10, 12 years ago, if you look at the whole Monica Lewinsky, Bill Clinton debacle, if that was the era that you were born into, what does that say about that your own feelings about what's public information?
There's some lighthearted humor in the book, but it's not really a tongue-in-cheek poke at this. You really try to capture this moment in time, I think.
I try to.
Yeah. I think what's scary about the book, besides all these things that we've kind of cast aside, is just how accurately you've captured stuff. When you had the idea for the book, how many things did you have in mind at that point, and how did the book grow over time?
Well, the book actually began as an article in the Washington Post magazine last year. It was a cover story called "Going, Going, Gone," and that was it was just 10 very, very short essays, a couple paragraphs each. There was one about cash. There was one about landlines, and so on. And the response to it was amazing. People were, the comments on it just grew and grew and grew, with people adding to these lists. And you've probably gotten them via email. People forward you things that are, remember when,
mm-hmm.
You remember when the subway costs a quarter. And I think that kind of thing really speaks to people. But what appealed to people about this article was that they were objects and ideas that are really still relevant in our lives. I don't think that milkmen, for example, are as relevant in our lives. That's not, or top hats, gloves. We're not talking about things that happened, in our parents' generation, our grandparents' generation. Most of the things I wrote about, I think people who are in their 20s and 30s and 40s can remember. We remember what it was like to go out and buy, your first CD, or little things like what it was like to lick stamps. So I think that that's what appealed to people about the article, was that they were able to relate to these little bits of their own lives. And I more and more got interested in the idea of the speed of our lives, the way in which change is happening at such a fast rate. When you think about how much the world has changed in the last, 15 years. 15 years ago, nobody had cell phones, no one had email, no one had blogs. So much of it's rooted in technology, of course. But, not just 15 years. And when you think about the difference between, 1940 and 1955, it doesn't seem quite as drastic, although I guess that's easy for me to say because I wasn't there. But I think a lot of people would agree that the change that's happened between this generation and like my generation and my parents' generation, the change that's happened between those two generations is a lot more drastic than, say, between my great-grandfather's generation and his parents. Does that make sense?
I know. Yeah. My daughter was talking to me yesterday, and with Ted Kennedy's passing, I guess someone at school made a remark, maybe an older, maybe a teacher or somebody, about the band, the Dead Kennedys. And so she was telling me something about them like I'd never heard of them. I said, actually, I think if you look outside in the garage, in the stack of record albums, there's probably a Dead Kennedys album. She said, record albums? And I swear, I'm not kidding about this. This was an actual conversation. It's a girl grown up with CDs and DVDs, and she's seen a stray audio cassette around, but, record albums, oh. So I showed her. It's like, oh, those have music on them? Yeah. We've got a comment from the web chat. Vivica says, handwriting and good penmanship also obsolete. I'm a retired teacher. And, she hosts this show on Blog Talk Radio. And then Zeke adds, don't forget grammar and spelling.
Yeah, those are both actually discussed in the book. Full words is a subject, as is cursive writing. The idea of grammar especially interests me because people get so righteous about spelling and grammar. I mean, I do too. But in fact, we forget how English is constantly changing, how languages are constantly changing. I think we're resistant to changes that are taking place now because it seems like a dumbing down. Using the letter U instead of writing Y-O-U seems like doesn't seem like evolution. It seems like we're spiraling downwards, but it's a fact. And as far as handwriting goes, it's very sad in a way. I have terrible handwriting, and I learned how to write scripts. Did it for half an hour a day for years at school, and my handwriting's terrible. So imagine the children now who often are only getting 20 minutes a week in handwriting practice. One thing that I learned in researching the book that I thought was really interesting is how handwriting. There's a thought that handwriting really started to devolve thanks to ballpoint pens. How before that, even fountain pens took a lot of blame for making people's handwriting worse. There was a thought that you needed to take the breaks to dip your quill into ink in order to get nice penmanship. But also, and I think everyone who's ever written with a ballpoint pen or a fountain pen can relate to the difference. With a fountain pen, although you're not dipping the ink, you don't have to push down very hard. You just sort of can glide your hand across the page, almost like as if you're writing lightly with a pencil. It's about that same kind of weight. With a ballpoint pen, you really have to bear down on the page, which is how we got through it in carbon paper, which is another subject in the book. But I think that bearing down on the page, makes your hand hurt and makes your handwriting look less graceful, as it were. But wow, I mean, I look at my grandparents' letters to each other, and they're little works of art. Which is also another thing that's sad is that we don't hang on to those things anymore. We don't write letters to each other hardly at all. And emails, while we save them in our inboxes, I don't think they have the same meaning. We don't. I was looking through letters a few weeks ago, and I saw pages letters that my dad had sent me years ago, and I felt like, of course, this looks just like the paper Dad would use, and look at the drawings he did. Or, you don't have that same sort of character with emails.
No, I agree. Well, Anna Jane, I'm going to jump in here because we're going to run out of time, and I want to tell everybody that you can find Anna Jane Grossman's book, Obsolete, an encyclopedia of once common things passing us by, at great bookstores everywhere or online at mrmedia.com, mrmedia.com, or amazon.com. And you can also find Anna online at Obsolete the Book, that's solid, obsoletethebook.com, or annajane.net. Or she's on Twitter, as I know firsthand, at twitter.com/AnnaJane. And she's also on the Huffington Post. Anna Jane, thank you so much for joining us on Mr. Media today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Our pleasure. And folks, for more interviews with your favorite journalists and authors, you can surf over to our main website, www.mrmedia.com. That's where you can listen to my earlier conversations with A.J. Jacobs of Esquire, John Darnton of the New York Times, former Washington Post reporter Peter Carlson, 2009 Pulitzer Prize winner for features Lane DeGregory, Washington Post reporter Philip Sheenan, and Writer's Digest publisher Jane Friedman, and many more. And please think about writing an online review of Mr. Media, casting a vote for Mr. Media, or marking Mr. Media as one of your favorites Whether you listen on Blog Talk Radio, TrueSlant, Digital Journal, Vox, Current, Podcast Pickle, MediaFly, Blueberry, Zencast, Current, I said that already, didn't I, or Odeo. Subscribe to Mr. Media on iTunes and you'll never miss a show. Just search Mr. Media Interviews from within iTunes and subscribe for free. Or subscribe to Mr. Media's blog on the Amazon Kindle Reader. You can also listen with a piece of string and a tin can in many locations. If you've got an idea for a guest, email me directly at bob@andelman.com. You can also follow me on Facebook or on Twitter, www.twitter.com/Andelman. Thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate when you give up a little piece of your day and spend it with us. Thanks for listening, everybody.